Good morning, everybody, and I'd like to welcome you to the Planning and Community Development Committee meeting for July 11, 2019. I also acknowledge that we are meeting this morning on the Sechelt Nation, First Nations territory in the district of Sechelt as well. Yes. So, we have an agenda this morning. There are some copies on the side table if anybody would like to look at the order of proceedings. We will proceed in order so that first item, though, I have a couple of changes to the agenda. First, with the board's agreement, I'd like to move item number 8 up the agenda to make it follow item number 4. So it will become item number 5 and consequentially amend everything else. And Director McMahon, I believe you have an item of new business. And again, what was that?
It's a $75,000 community amenity contribution.
Okay, we'll put that as item number 21 to follow communications on the agenda. Okay. Are there any other changes to the agenda? Could I have a motion, please, then to accept the agenda as amended? Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you very much. We have 2 delegations this morning, presentations, so I'll proceed firstly to Mr. John Rowe of the Dead Boat Disposal Society. Sounds very interesting, Mr. Rowe. Please go ahead. Welcome.
Good morning.
And you're going to have a presentation, so I'm going to.
Good morning. My name is John Rowe. I'm with the Dead Boat Disposal Society, and we work throughout the Sailor Sea and up through our coast. Right now, we're working with an organization called Relmax Group of Companies in Sailor Sea Industrial Services, which were our Songhees and Esquimalt Nation, working with Transport Canada on removal of derelict boats throughout our coast. This program began about 3 years ago. It was kind of technically difficult to get into it, and we, through perseverance, working with the Transport Canada, we've come out with an MOU with Transport Canada in the Capital Regional District for removal of boats. We're also working with the District of Sechelt in Porpoise Bay. Right now we have 5 listed there for further removal. We're moving up the coast. We're working with Quebec Regional District up there doing our inventories right now. And so what we're trying to do right now is there's 2 more years left of this round of funding. It was $6.7 million. We've so far taken out 33 boats, and additional 16 are coming out within the next month. In total, with private donations, we've taken out 44 so far. So we've taken out a lot. The picture that you're seeing right now is this is in Fulford Harbor, and all the boats and all that stuff that's on there is all from Burgoyne Bay. We took out just 2 boats and a huge amount of marine debris. So it was over 600,000 tons of debris in boats in just one bay alone. So we're, as an organization, as the Dead Boat Society, we come in and we do our surveys before of the bays and inlets, and we try to include in all this the removal of a substantive amount of marine debris in our inlets and our shoreline. So what we're asking today this program, it requires the participation of whether it's private entity. Right now we have an MOU with Capital Regional District of the coverage of 25%, and the federal government pays the other 75%. As an organization, we do it all. We do the assessments, we do the seizures, we do the removal and disposal of the whole program. So we handle that end of it ourselves, but we have to come up with the other 25%. So what I'm asking today is, I know it's this fiscal year, but for next fiscal year, if we get started today on inventorying the boats on the Sunshine Coast, we can actually find out how much it's cost, and then that determines our ask from the regional government, the Sunshine Coast regional government, if they want to participate. But we need to find out what's out there right now. This is a program that we've, like I say, hammered out the details, and we're finally making progress here. And so nobody else, this whole program was designed for the 3 oceans, the Arctic and the East Coast, and in the West Coast, and we appear to be the only organization that's doing it in all of Canada. So the Department of Fisheries, or the Department of Transportation, has assured us that there's any monies left, we can spend it. So I want to spend it on our coast as fast as possible. So just keep it brief, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present today.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rowe. It's a very interesting program, and it's one that's been a problem for many communities for an awful long time. And I knew sooner or later somebody would come up with an idea, and that's great that you stepped in there. The questions by the board. Director McMahon.
Well, my question is actually for staff. Do we have a function for this?
Not really. We do most of the work. I mean, we do need to review the documents and things like that. And if desired, we work with an MOU. We've already designed one up and things like that. But we pretty well do most of the work.
No, I was just asking SCRD staff if we have a way of funding this.
Yeah.
That's my question.
No. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Grant and aid might be a fit for this work, but there's no solid waste or planning function that would relate to this.
I guess a question that I would ask Mr. Rowe is, what kind of money are we looking at? And what would you project?
I don't know. I have got a general idea of what it's going to cost overall in Porpoise Bay, and we're having some discussion with the District of Sechelt, but I have no idea what you have on your shorelines in that. We've spent a great deal of money in through the Gulf Islands and things like that. We're probably in total about $1.5 million by the time we're done through the CRD, and the CRD has will provide up to about $400,000 actually for that. So.
Yeah, so it's not a small amount of money, in other words, to do a program like this.
No, it's not. We have had some discussion with the Transport Canada that they will consider, because you're a smaller community, you don't have the taxes as the CRD does, and that they will consider a lesser amount. So we need to negotiate with that as we go along. But yes.
Thank you. Director Ties?
So I assume since you're a society, you're a non-for-profit, is that correct?
Yes, we are.
And then my other question, I forget it now, so I'll come back to that later. Thanks.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. I know the District of Sechelt had applied for the funding in conjunction with the Sechelt Nation to do the assessment in Porpoise Bay.
Yes.
And they have done the assessment piece,
Yes.
but you're saying, I don't know how much we spent for that. I think $75,000 or something like that.
You got $78,000. I think you spent $40,000, but the reality is the boats are gone or sunk. Mm-hmm. So we reached out to your staff, and we've been back out and done one survey. We're working with another group out of Brentwood Bay that have been doing marine restoration in there. Mm-hmm. So what I'll be doing over the summer, we have 5 new boats. Every boat that they assessed is gone. 6 of them got sunk. We know where they are, so we're going to put divers down and cameras and things like that and bring them back up in the future here. They're all full of debris. So right now it's an ongoing with John relationship, to find out what we have. I'll be serving 5 additional boats now that we've gone out and surveyed that are abandoned and haven't been moved. Mm-hmm. So that's where we'll get started anyways. And this summer I'll have a more full list of the number of boats that are in that bay. There's quite a bit, and the federal government's well aware of it. They want to clean it up also.
So I know that the regional district has an issue. Up in Pender, for example, there's a lot. There's down in Howe Sound. So I think it is something that we need to look at with staff to see how we actually move it forward. Because part of it was we would need to apply for grant funding from the federal government to assist with our portion, which then we could leverage using your resources.
That's right.
So I don't know how we move that forward here. It might be that we refer this to staff to come back to us and let us know how to proceed.
We go first to Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, a question about, on the barge there is the sea cans full of debris, so I'm wondering about when a boat becomes debris and the disposal of the boats and the fiberglass, and is there a difference between like the styrofoam that's on the beaches and the boats, and where does this program come together?
No, through the chair. That's where it got complicated, is when we first started, we had gone out and done our surveys, and we were going to make application. In the Capital Regional District, there's always been a regulation or a policy in place with the provincial government about dumping contaminants in our dumps, right? Always been, but it's never been enforced anywhere in BC. Well, the Capital Regional District decided that they were going to now implement that policy. It ground the whole program on the coast to a halt. Absolutely, is part of the problem that we're facing. So what we do now is even with the regional district here, I'm talking to District of Sechelt, is you don't want this stuff in your dump, so we're going to have to take it somewhere else. So again, we test we pull them out, we test for a series of contaminants, and then we separate them out into 3 piles, so it becomes industrial waste, contaminated waste, and just general garbage. The general garbage and contaminated waste we can get rid of it in the landfill. The other industrial waste has to go up to Swan Lakes. We're not seeing much of it, but things are showing up like asbestos and mercury, zinc, copper, tributylin, lead, mercury, and things like that are showing up. And then, so we work with an ISO company. So Rolmax owns Point Hope Shipyards and that. So we have a yard there for separation and things like that in a proper way. So we'll find a solution of not putting it in your backyard. Is what we're trying to say. So, and it's not cheap. So.
Mr. Rowe, I've got to imagine that you have something in writing that describes your program, and that would be easier for staff to respond to than a verbal presentation.
No, absolutely.
And I ask that you could maybe provide that to us, that we could then refer to staff on that. So, Director Ties?
Yeah, I've come up with a new question. I've still forgotten the old one. The thing that would sound fair to me is that those people that would ultimately be the ones responsible for creating this garbage should also be the ones paying for it. And I'm just wondering if there's any kind of mechanism that could be explored there, whether it's, taxing marina slips or anybody with a dock, and as well as, of course, some of the commercial operators as well, because not all derelict boats are recreational in nature. It doesn't seem very fair to somebody who doesn't own a boat that they would have to pay for removing derelict boats. And so I'm wondering if that is something that we could add to something that staff could explore as part of that initiative.
Through our efforts through Shield-Melkison, Bill C-64 is being passed at the end of this month, so it's going to deal with a lot of that into the future. But we have, the vessels concerned, people have identified 1,400 boats on our coast that are abandoned. I know of another 1,000 on top of that. So what we're trying to do is work with the provincial and federal government to develop a program very similar to the tire program and to scrap cars. Scrap cars were a real issue. I was up working here 10, 15 years ago with, when they put the scrap car program in. So the governments did pay with industry to get rid of these things, and this is what we're trying to do, is treat it as a waste management issue, not a derelict boat issue. But going forward, you're absolutely right. Once their boat is identified, then I think somebody should be held accountable. I've been at it for 30 years, and not one person has ever been held accountable. So, yeah.
Director McMahon?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we ask staff to come back to us this fall with a report on how we might work with the Dead Boat Society in 2020.
Would you include that motion that the act ask staff to respond to information provided by the Dead Boat Society? We need more information in writing about the program and about the potential costs and things of this nature. so that we would understand exactly what we're asking staff to do.
Okay.
Okay. And second by Director Seegers. Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, call the question. Any vote on it? Favor? Opposed? Thank you very much, Mr. Ray. If you would work with staff then, Mr. Rowe, and provide them some information about the program and ideas on costs, because that's the important part to our budgeting process, to have some idea of how big this project is and how much it's going to cost us.
Absolutely. No, it's the identification of what we have there too. So that's the biggest part for me right now is just where are they and how much, you know.
And don't forget Gibson's.
Not at all. Not in the slightest. I've been there several times. We're putting dive crews down shortly, so it's wonderful. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, bye-bye.
Our next delegation, Mr. Matthew Marquette and David Morgan, and I believe they're talking about the ALC application 58605 for the land exclusion, which is also on our agenda for discussion this morning. So if you would please come forward, both of you, if we just want to come up and sit, please. Yeah. And you can pull another chair up there. Okay. Oh, one's for and one's against. Oh, that's great. No, no debate. Oh, please. Who would? On my list, I have Mr. Matthew Marquette.
That would be me.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Matthew Marquette. I live at 1741 Jensen Road. I'm here to speak on behalf of the concerned residents of West Howe Sound Area F. Before beginning, I do wish to thank you all for this opportunity. We thank you for this opportunity. As residents in the community adjacent to DL 1398, we are here to express serious concern with respect to this application. While we have a number of issues, the main concerns are the land size in the application. We have seen 3 maps, which I have copies of here. 3 maps with 3 different identifiers of the land size, and they don't match. The application goes for 0.3 hectares to 1.16 hectares and 1.18 hectares. There's quite a conflict there. The second, identifying land already deemed by the ALC as non-farmable, now appearing to be determined farmable. And third, the optics and lack of transparency during this entire process. The requested section of land in this application be exchanged out of its ALR designation is identified as 1.16 hectares in one of the application's maps. The ALC records show the non-ALR portion of DL 1398 sized at 0.3 hectares. And the original application notice published in the local weekly references 1.18 hectares. The confusion as to the accurate landmass in itself is alarming. Adding to the concern is why the section of land identified to be exchanged out was chosen. The application implies this land adjacent to Newman Road is not suitable for agriculture. That doesn't mean it's not suitable for farming. It also implies that accessing the current non-ALR designated land will lose too much valuable land to roadway. All farms have access roads within their boundaries. This can leave one to wonder what the reason is for the application. Why would you want to remove farmable land from the ALR? We can speculate that it is for housing development. We have members of the community here today that have been told by the applicant that this application is being done for future development. Those attending the June 25th APC meeting will recall this was a comment by the applicant that was questioned on at least 3 occasions during that meeting. To this, we wholeheartedly disagree with the application for exclusion and any change to ALR designated property. Again, we can't afford to lose any ALR land, and switching one parcel for another is not acceptable. Our community represents 50 years of residence on the Sunshine Coast. who can attest to decades of housing developments on land that should be used for agriculture and farming growth. In fact, the SCRD's ALR webpage shows mappings that indicate the vastly undersized amount of ALR designated land on the coast. We should not be taking land out, or in this case, taking a less desirable parcel of land and exchanging it for a better parcel. While we should, in fact, be adding land to the ALR, the least we should do is protect it. Referring to the SCRD's Agricultural Area Plan, number 4 says, develop clear policies that serve to protect, preserve, and promote agriculture while preserving the rural character of the Sunshine Coast. The Agricultural Land Commission performed soil capability mapping for the purposes of rating land to be retained and protected. That is why the land in the ALR has been put in the ALR. It's fair to say that the 0.3 or 1.16, I don't know, of land already deemed non-ALR was done so because it was identified at that time as not being of quality soil capability necessary to meet ALR standards. So I am confused as to what has changed. How does farmland that was deemed unfarmable now magically retain the soil classification necessary to fit into the ALR? If you refer to Dave Townsend, Minister of Agriculture Communications, his news release of 2017 titled, quote, "Farmland is for farming," unquote, states, land in the ALR falls into one of 7 soil classes, ranging from Class 1, a wide range of crops can be grown without difficulty, to Class 7, unsuitable for soil-based agriculture or sustained grazing, but suitable for barns, greenhouses, and processing facilities. And in 1981, this piece of land in the ALR was deemed farmable by the Agricultural Land Committee. So again, I wonder what changed. All the application includes is a comment that the northeast portion of DL 1398 has steep topography and rocky and poor soil conditions. Is that enough to overturn studies and soil capability mapping? Again, the application implies this land adjacent to Newman Road is not suitable for agriculture. That doesn't mean it's not suitable for farming. The portion of land deemed non-ALR was given this designation for clear and justifiable reasons, and those reasons have not changed. To say that the current non-ALR portion can be an equal substitute for the current ALR designated land is misleading and unqualified. My personal and professional life, I believe that optics of a situation speak volumes. And the level of transparency in a potentially contentious situation speaks to the standard of professionalism and respect of all involved. In this instance, the approach the applicants took to publish this application by posting the minimal frontage signage in the least publicly visible location, by choosing to post their application in one newspaper on the Sunshine Coast, which is not the primary publication, and by only making an effort to communicate with the members of the community after the petition and concerns were brought forward, adds to the optics. Adding to the concern is that the SCRD and its subcommittees would even consider approval of an application that has been submitted with no definitive or confirmed land value in itself is alarming. But knowing one of the applicants is the chair of the SCRD's Agriculture Advisory Committee is unsettling and only increases the level of concern this community has to the optics of this process. In closing, the members of our community of West Howe Sound have brought their concerns forward, and we are making it known to you today, and we'll follow up to the ALC. We're going to send a package to the Commission, I have it right here, of our objection and total rejection of any attempt by Dave Morgan, Heather Morgan, or Morgan Capital Incorporated, or any other affiliation, to exclude the current ALR designated portion of the property. The SCRD has made efforts to identify and create a Sunshine Coast agricultural plan, which I pointed out. This is identified on the SCRD's maps, ALR information such as the Agricultural Area Plan approved by the SCRD Board on October 23, 2014, its backup report, and the West Howe Sound official community plans. The Sunshine Coast Regional District, with the support of the BC Agricultural Land Commission, has already clearly identified the need for ALR designation, and most importantly, that ALR land is to be retained and protected. That means all ALR land, whether it's 1,000, 100, 1.18, 1.16, or 0.3. There is an obligation on the part of the SCRD board to honor this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Marquette. Now, just a question to staff before we hear from Mr. Morgan. Staff, am I correct? And this is actually a referral to the SCRD from the Agricultural Land Commission as an application, not an application to the SCRD. Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that is correct. It is
Okay.
a referral.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Morgan, invite you to make your presentation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chair, council members. I am the chair of the Agriculture Advisory Committee. In this case, I recused myself. I left the meeting. I actually left the building. I didn't speak to this. I didn't know anything about a petition or any concern that people had until I got the minutes of the meeting, which was about 2 weeks later. Now, basically what it is there's a non-ALR portion that's in the middle of the property. It's sort of a pizza pie slice that resides there. The reason it resides there is because the property next door, DL 965, which is a blueberry farm now, they did the same thing. They did a land exchange. I guess in reality, when they did the agricultural land reserve, they drew lines on maps. They didn't do detailed. They couldn't do a detailed assessment. They had 6 months to come up with what area was going to be agricultural land reserve. So they couldn't do a detailed study on it. So there'll be sections where they deem it to be non-ALR. And in this case, because 965 traded, now I'm surrounded with ALR property around and this one little pizza pie slice in the middle. In this case, what we're doing is we're trying to exchange that or just move that over to Newman where there's more services available there. So we could do a development there. And he said I had 3 different, I've always gone by, we're trying to divide that off, build a house for my daughter, and what I'm trying to do with that is on the ALR portion, I'm going to do an equestrian because my daughter's into horse riding. The one thing is there's no loss to ALR. In fact, it'll be better for the Agricultural Land Reserve. We're taking a piece of property, and I'm going by an agrologist's report, and even though they say on here it'll all be subject to a proof, I'm going by an agrologist's report that was done in February 1986, and they have actually a test pit there, and the test pit shows that it's class 6. And under the agricultural capability, it's left blank. Basically, there's no agricultural capability of that area by Newman Road. But the property that I'm exchanging it for, which is in the middle, has class 3, which it could be done into, with improvements, to a class 2, which is about one of their top rated. I've got pictures of the existing. It's not just the slope of the land just by Newman Road. It's the rockiness of it. It can't be developed, as a farm. So basically, I'm willing to do what he says, subject to the following conditions, to provide an updated report, but maybe I should just show these around. To the chair, sorry. And now to these other criticisms that I'm getting about legal notice to neighbors. Under the ALC rules, which is what I have to follow, I have to advertise in a local newspaper for 2 consecutive weeks. The only newspaper that's given to every member of the community is in their mailbox. And basically, that's why I went with the local as opposed to the Coast Reporter. And they said local newspaper, so that's another reason. I erected a sign midway on the property on the highway. That's the only place I could. As the ALC says, the sign must be placed at the midpoint of the property along a public road. Newman Road intersects the property. I couldn't put it there. The only place was Port Mellon Highway because I could put it on the midpoint. The other choice would be to put it on someone's backyard, and then that one person would be aware, but that's all. So I put it on the highway. The request from to send out registered letter, the ALC states that the landowner must have land in the ALR, and I informed everyone around me, and I believe I've got letters from the YMCA in support, and Judith, I think, wrote a letter as well. I'm not sure if Wolfgang did or not. There was a petition that went around, and I didn't find out about this because I recused myself from the meeting. So I came, when I got the minutes of the meeting, I thought, well, if there's some type of petition, I better find out who's upset. And so my wife, Heather, and I went around and knocked on doors just to find out from the people if, what their issues were. Then I got back from these people, the development is for a mobile home park for low-income individuals. That's what they were telling people to get their signature. The development will increase your taxes by using up our existing services. The development will lower your property values. Were all things that were told to them. And first of all, I have no interest in doing a mobile home park. I've seen too many episodes of Trailer Park Boys to want to be doing that. Anyhow, there's no interest in doing any of those things. And if we were doing a development other than a house there, we'd have to follow all the SCRD rules and do the advertisements and everything else, in which the public would have a concern at that time. So the land size is another one. That's an issue. And when you're dealing with a property that big, you'll go look at various sources. And if I look at BC assessment records, in one of the records it says 103.7, and another mapping I've got, it says 102. But I know the portion that was non-ALR changed because if you're dealing with the BC assessment, when you get your taxes, they show which portion is non-ALR and which is actual ALR, because you get an exemption for it. My exemption changed in 2012, where it was reduced from 5% down to 1%. So that means that size shrunk. So what I had to do was, because everyone's using the same mapping that's on the computer, I had to go back and I got Bennett Land Surveying to confirm that amount for me, because I know, using BC assessment records, that size was bigger. Bennett Land Surveying came out with this size here, and which is the 1.18 of it. And both these things, I'm told by the SCRD, that they're, basically, they'd be accepting of this subject to the following conditions: the location and size of the non-ALR portion, which I can verify with the ALC readily, because according to their records, that's 39.8 in the agricultural land reserve, and which would equate to 98 acres. My land was surveyed at 103 acres, and according to the BC assessment, it's 103.7 acres. So there's going to be these small discrepancies in land size. I think, it's a following condition I have to do and prove this to the ALC. I don't, it would be subject to these things, so I have to prove that anyhow to them. So And we're actually enhancing farming here because we're trading, essentially we're just moving an area that isn't farmable to an area that is. And that makes one big continuous portion there that is all now in the ALR. And then that way I get to build a house for my daughter who's into equestrian. And I know it's kind of tough on people because I've been developing the other side of the property with my house in an agricultural building. I've done my irrigation ponds and created pasture and things, and mostly in the line of equestrian. But the other side I haven't really touched, even though the last year I've had permission to go in there through highway access. But I haven't done that because I thought it would be advisable to do this land exchange first. So I'm asking you to accept this application.
Okay, thank you. Thank you both for your presentations. It certainly helps us in terms of, I'm not sure if it helped us making decisions, quite frankly, but we have heard from you both, and thank you for your respectful presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah, sorry, I apologize. I should have offered the board an opportunity to ask any questions of either one of you, so I'll do that now, sort of thing. So does the board have any questions? Director Yeltsin.
Sure, thanks, Chair. Yeah, thank you both for the presentation. It's nice to see the community getting together and having a discussion about ALR land. That's kind of I'm going to a couple of questions. I'll start with Mr. Marquette, Matt,
Yep.
right, and
Matt's
David.
fine.
Matt and David. Okay. So, have you ever seen the actual application form? It's called the Provincial Agricultural Land Commission application submission. It's the official document that David would have filled in online and sent to the
I don't
ALC.
think so, no.
You
No.
haven't been able to see that. Okay. Okay. Could you tell me a little bit about the petition? I don't see, like, I read the petition and I don't see anything on there about a mobile home park.
I think I've got the petition, a copy of the petition in my other file by my chair.
I don't recall anything about a mobile home issue in the petition.
It's not. There was no
Oh,
reference to any development in the petition.
Oh,
There
okay.
was nothing said about a development in the petition at
Okay.
all.
Okay.
Can I interject though?
Through the chair.
Mr. Chair, where we found out about the mobile home park was when we started knocking on doors, and one of the parties told us basically why she signed the petition was because it's mobile home park for low-income individuals. And then when 2 doors later, it was the same story again. So that's where it comes up.
So you weren't referring to the actual petition, you're referring to door knocking and where you got your information from?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I've never seen, because of privacy laws, I've never seen the actual petition. It was never presented to me. Never seen it.
Other questions? Director Yeltsin?
It is kind of my neighborhood, so I guess I do have some questions about it. So, so the neighbors got together, they signed a petition, so how did that kind of come together? Like, how did the neighborhood kind of come together?
It was brought to our attention by one of the neighbors. I'm not at liberty to divulge his name. That there was this going to happen, that there was a land exchange happening, and that pointed out that there was the ad in the paper, and then out on the highway, which is really dangerous to pull over and read the sign. We went out there and read the sign. There's not a lot of room to pull over, high traffic area. Anyways, we did that, and then that's when we looked into it. And that's when all the neighbors, there's a lot of us that do get together, and it's a small community, close-knit. We've raised each other's kids, and we've all been there for years and years. So when this comes up, anything that changes in our neighborhood, we do get together and chit-chat. So this came up, and it was everything, and it wasn't just trailer park. It was everything from click homes to his daughter's home, and then the question came up, well, why does it have to come out of the LR to put a home there? We couldn't see the reason for that. But so anyway, that's what sparked it, was that we heard about this ad in the paper. So then the discussions came up, but it was never about a trailer park. Those are things that were thrown out. Lots of people had different ideas and different fears. So that was being voiced. But I'll show you the petition, and I think I gave a copy to the SCRD on that one board meeting, and on there it does not mention anything about trailer parks or development. So.
Go ahead, Director Hiltz.
Okay, so I'm going to ask David. So yeah, I got your petition, or your application, and it says that the proposal is to subdivide, so that's the intent of the application, is to subdivide.
Off the
Okay.
non-ALR part.
So in the application, like I was reviewing the ALR's sample applications, and there is a section which talks about kind of the land use. So these are sort of the questions that the ALR or ALC would ask. So I'll just ask you kind of a couple, because they're not in your application. So it says, quantify and describe in all detail all agriculture that currently takes place on the parcel. So I'm interested in what's actually happening on that land right now from an agricultural point of view.
Basically, we're just trying to, I've got an excavator, and so what I've done is I've done drainage ditches. I've done an irrigation pond. I'm not, the only thing we grow there is blackberries, basically. And then we bring horses over, and I intend to put a stable there and do equestrian.
So the blackberries are an agricultural crop?
I guess you could consider it that.
Do you harvest them as an agricultural crop?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Because there just isn't the money. I'll give you an example. Wolfgang's put in more than $1 million into his property next door. He gets $15,000 a year in blackberries. That's one of the reasons we haven't really developed it. I'm trying to get ideas on how to develop it properly. And we were looking at various things like wineries. We've had various proposals. And that would be on the one side, on the Port Mellon Highway side.
So if you don't have any, so you would say there's no agriculture happening on the property?
Yes, right.
Okay.
I don't have an agricultural income from it.
Okay. And then another question would be, describe all the non-agricultural uses that are taking place on the property, such as a house and a shop and buildings. And could you describe
That's a nursery that we built there that is also for farm equipment. We're going to, our intention is to create a farm there, but we have to have buildings in order to do that.
So what buildings currently exist on the property?
There's an agricultural building and a rancher. It's our retirement home. We're planning on moving there when I do less traveling. Yeah.
Okay. May I continue, Chair?
Please.
So you've owned this property since 2002, is what the application states?
I've owned it for 16 years, and I didn't start working on a house until about 4 years ago or something like that. Yeah.
Okay. So seeing that your intent is to subdivide, the other part of the questions are, the ALC is asking about subdivision. So the questions go, how would this subdivision proposal support agriculture in the short term and the long term?
I'm taking a piece of property that basically does not have any agricultural potential, so Class 6, and I'm just moving it to, for this area so we can have one contiguous area that will be farmable. And up till past couple of years, I haven't really had enough time to develop it because I was traveling a lot. And but our intention was to do a winery at some time and to do an equestrian center. And but funding, for these things becomes an issue. The subdivision was just basically to subdivide that property. I guess the ALR rules have changed. You're allowed one residence on the property, so it's subdivided off. I can get a second residence there for my daughter, and still on the ALR part, put the barn in question.
Could I respond just to a couple of things?
You may.
Thank you. Once again, this boils down to, this comes up as optics. To say that there's one house and a barn or another building on the property is misleading. I mean, we know the property. We've seen the property. There's a trailer on there that's a permanent trailer. There's a second one going in. The sewer is all laid out. He's got the septic field already laid in. It's just, it's the optics of all this, saying one thing when it looks like something else. And I just wanted to say that we've all been around the property. We've been there for years. Like I say, we've lived in the neighborhood. We've seen the improvements that he's doing, and it just doesn't look like agriculture to us. So. And then to hear that looking for prices for click homes, it's just a parcel, a package that's really disturbing to the community. So that I just wanted to respond to that part.
Okay, we don't often have that opportunity to have proponents and opponents before us and have a conversation about an application.
Yeah.
I think most often these conversations take place at the Agricultural Land Commission, and which I understand, Mr. Morgan, you recused yourself from. But did you have an agent represent you at that? Because you would be entitled to have somebody speak as an agent for you at that and answer some of these questions.
No, I just recused myself from the whole matter, and the SCRD presented their report. The planning department presented the report to the AAC. They don't report on your behalf. They don't advocate for you, though, when they do that. Just
no, they're just.
Good. Thank you. Yeah. Good. Okay. Director Hills.
Sure. So one of the things that this proposal turns on is the size of this parcel and the location.
That's correct.
And there does seem to be some dispute. The ALR and the SCRD data, which goes back to 1973 and is current to now. There was a lot of work done in 2010 to 2014 to improve the quality and the defensibility of the land reserve boundaries. Mm-hmm. So if we were to assume that it is a 0.3 hectare triangle, would you be applying for an exclusion?
Yes.
So a 0.3, okay.
Yeah. I think the whole thing hinges on what I've been charged here on my BC assessment. Why did it change and everything? That's why I hired Bennett Land Surveying to go back to see, how much land it actually was. But would I be applying for it? Yes, I would.
And under the current zoning, you need a 10,000 or 1 hectare to subdivide off. So you wouldn't be eligible to, is that correct?
I don't know. I haven't looked into that.
All right. Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for your respectful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Moving forward now on our agenda, I'd like to first of all ask directors for a motion to receive all the reports, the minutes, and the correspondence that are on the agenda. Oh, yeah, thank you. Yeah. Give that motion, please. This is for everything, okay? Moved and seconded. Thank you. All in favor? Thank you very much. I'd also like a motion to receive the information that was provided to us by Mr. Marquette. Mr. Morgan, yes, today. The one is a mapping and one is photographs. Motion received. Thank you. Thank you. Received. Okay. I believe, Mr. Morgan, these photographs are of the site that you would like to subdivide off. That's correct. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. We'll provide those to staff. Okay. So the next item on our agenda is the application for exclusion from the and inclusion from ALR Land Reserve for Morgan property. Now, one of the things that should inform the board is what I don't have a vote on this as a non-rural director. This is rural directors only. But when I was going through the agenda with the board, and perhaps staff will address this when they respond, and that is that is it possible to ask for an extension to the ALR to give the opportunity for the board to receive the information that would clarify items number 1 and 2 in the recommendation, so that we're not kind of making a conditional support and we will never see that information come back to us, so that it leaves it up to the ALC. But it may be important that the board might want to see that, and I'd leave that to the directors. But if that could be addressed as well. And so go to Mr. Sue, Senior Planner.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. So this is a referral from the Agricultural Land Commission, the ALC, for an application to exchange lands in and out of the Agricultural Land Reserve, ALR. So the intent of the application is to improve land use of the farm and reduce conflicts with non-farm uses. So the proposal is consistent with the West Howe Sound OCP and the zoning bylaw, subject to verification of location, size, and agricultural capability of the lands. For exchange, the proposal may result in no net loss of agricultural land. So the application only deals with the land exchange, and the SCRD is asked to provide a recommendation to the ALC on this referral only. Any potential future development of the land would be reviewed through an application planning, will be reviewed through an applicable planning application, and the community will have an opportunity to give input through that process. Therefore, staff recommends supporting this application conditional upon the ALC verifying the location, size, and agricultural capability of the lands for exchange. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So go to the directors for questions. Director Hiltz.
A quick question of staff. I'm wondering about how the settlement containment boundary is related to this proposal of the OCP, of the West Howe Sound OCP. There's a settlement containment boundary?
Staff?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and excellent question. Settlement containment boundary was added into the West Howe Sound official community plan to restrict the development of residential or density to the Langdale area, and to not pursue water main extension and other service beyond up through the Port Mellon Highway and towards Storvold Road, etc. I don't have the map in front of me here to verify the particular boundary. However, if the edge of the property adjacent to Munro Road is on the other side of the settlement containment boundary, that would have to be considered in a future application for development, and we would provide recommendation on whether or not the construction of a single-family dwelling is concerned or at contravention with that policy. However, strictly speaking, this particular application of a swap of farmland would not be subject to settlement containment concerns. Thank you.
Are there any further questions? Director Hiltz?
I don't have any further questions, but I'd like to kind of elaborate on how I see my role in this application.
Yes.
If you may,
Yep.
Chair. So reviewing the ALC applications, the role of the local government in considering an application is to ensure that the information is sufficient for local government staff and board to make an informed recommendation. And further to that if the local government believes that the application is incomplete and requires more information, the application can be returned to the applicant for editing. And in my reading of the application, there are sections missing, particularly the land use, the sketch plan. And so that would be my recommendation that I would present to the board, is to return the application to the applicant for editing, to update the information, and I feel it's kind of a cart before the horse. You know, if you allow my kind of agricultural pun or turn of phrase, we don't even know what parcel of land we're dealing with. And so that's our role as a local government, is to get that information sorted out before we make a decision. So I feel I don't have sufficient information. So my recommendation would be to return it to the applicant for editing.
Thank you. This is a referral to us from the ALC,
Correct.
so can we even request that happen? Because it isn't an application to us.
Looking at Director Hiltz, he appears to be referring to some documentation.
I am referring to the documentation off of the ALC procedures, and this is one of the options that local governments has. It's part of the reason my understanding is it goes through the local government is to ensure that the quality of the information is best as it can be, so that the ALC isn't having to generate discussions on information that is incorrect or incomplete. And that's, so that's what I'm going with, is that it's within local government and within the discretion of local government. We could actually refuse this and not even have it proceed. But in terms of transparency and collaboration, I think it's best for the community and the applicant to have a chance to put the best information forward so that we can all understand. And understanding this parcel of land is key to this. And my review of the lines that are drawn on the maps is that the triangle that is submitted, I can't see how they line up with what was found in a 1981 survey. So I don't feel confident in making this decision. So I feel that this is within our discretion as a local government to refer. It says the applicant can be returned to the applicant for editing, and so that would be my recommendation.
Refer to staff. Comment on that?
Thank you, Chair. This, while it is a referral, because ultimately the Agricultural Land Commission does make a decision, it's a little bit different than other referrals that we see, such as BC Timber Sales or Crown Resource referrals from Ministry of Forest, Lands, Natural Resource Operations, in that we don't have a specific referral response date. The applicant makes an application through the online web portal of the ALC, but it lands with us when the board has made a decision. Then it gets referred to the Agricultural Land Commission for decision, or I should say when the board makes a recommendation, for clarity, pardon me. Therefore, there is no specific referral expiry date like you may see in other cases. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So is the recommendation that's put forward that we request the ALC refer it back to the applicant?
No, the recommendation, I understand from Director Hiltz, is that we refer it back to the applicant and it would come back to us as a referral again.
But we can.
A continuation of this discussion.
So I'm a little confused because it did not come to us. So we cannot refer it back to the applicant. We could request that the ALC refer it back to the applicant for additional information.
Director Hiltz?
The way I understand it is right now it's considered under local government review, and within the local government review, we can return if the application is incomplete and we require more information. The application can be returned to the applicant for editing. So this is by us because the recommendation that would come out is that we forward the application on to the ALC with a recommendation either to refuse. What is the language? There's specific language, and the language they use is to refuse the proposal or approve the proposal. So that would be, so the first step is to forward it on and we can, with our discretion, not forward it on, and the application dies here. My feeling is that under transparency and collaboration, to let it die here does not report back to the community.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. I can tell you that from experience in the District of Sechelt, we actually requested that an application be denied and the ALC actually approved it. So we are just a referral agency at this point. We're not the determining body for this. So, I mean, I would question the process, but if that's what, I don't have to vote on this anyway. But
I'm just going to go back to staff and just to, is Director Hiltz's understanding of the process correct as far as you know? Yeah.
Thank you for the question, Chair. This is not a process that staff have a lot of experience with, but staff would commit to clarifying the process with the Agricultural Land Commission to ensure that the procedures as described and related by the Director are followed, and the intent of the motion, should staff be directed that way, is met. Thank you.
We have a motion on the floor. Is there any further discussion? Director Ties?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that that if we do ask the applicant to resubmit, that there's a clear outline of all the things that we do require, and I'm wondering if we should add that to the motion.
Director Hiltz, are you able to do that, or is it just to fully complete the?
Have we had a seconder on this yet?
We have.
Okay,
yes.
so we'd need to amend. Sure, we can put some specifics into it. So I would make a motion to amend the initial motion that the applicant submits an edited application following the ALC examples, and to clarify with the ALC that we need clarification, not having to make a decision. We need more clarity about that parcel. So I think the applicant needs to actually go to the ALC. That's the cart, right? We're the horse. So he needs to make sure that the cart, which is the size of the land, the location of the land, is accurate, because it just does not line up with any existing data that we have.
Okay, have you?
Director Pratt.
Yeah. Is that Director Pratt?
It's just clarification for Director Hiltz then. So essentially what we're asking for then are those conditions that are in the staff report are met prior to us making a decision on this and forwarding it on?
There's actually a little bit beyond that. In terms of the application, there's details missing about the size of the buildings being used on the land, how the agricultural aspects of it. It's incomplete, and so this is, the ALC wants to see that the intent of the land is to use it for agricultural purposes. The property's been owned for 18 years. To date, there has been little, or he would say no, agricultural activity on that land. So this is part of the application. And these are the questions that the ALC will be asking, is how much agriculture is happening on the land. So the sample applications on the ALC website are very complete, very detailed, and the application that has been received as part of the staff package is incomplete.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have a seconder for the amendment, firstly? Second?
And
No.
to speak to it quickly, I would like to second it, and I'm very impressed by the level of detail that you've gone into with this, Director Hiltz. So it's very, very hopeful for the rest of us at the table as well. Thank you.
Yeah. And have you able to capture the okay, but you, I know Director McMahon would like to speak, but perhaps we could learn what we're speaking about, certainly.
So essentially, it would be that the application be returned to the applicant for editing to include some missing information with respect to verifying the location and size of the portion of the non-ALR portion of land that he's applying to exclude. Also, the size of the buildings that are being used on the land and the current agricultural uses happening on the land. I think that's current agricultural uses on the land.
So, Director McMahon, did you want to speak?
Well, at this point, I'll vote for anything that moves this along, but I think asking the applicant to completely fill out the ALR form would probably capture that.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, so speaking first to the amendment to the motion, we have that moved and seconded. All in favor? And then speaking to the main motion, which now is a little bit more broadly defined, we have that has been moved and seconded, so that as amended, could the call the vote on the speaking to on the main motion as amended. So, okay. All in favor. So thank you. I think we understand what's going to happen is that it's going to be referred back to the applicant, and the applicant is going to be requested to provide additional information, and then it will come back to this table or to the ALC. I guess this table owns it now, so that it'll come back to this table through staff. So thank you very much, and thank you, Director Pratt.
I'd also like to make a motion to refer this to board today, and then that way it just moves it along a little bit faster for the applicant, so the process isn't,
The seconder, seconded by Director Hiltz. All in favor? Okay, thank you. I don't get a vote. Yep, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. So, time. It will take some more time. And thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to go through the next one. Turn it on and off. I like to. Sorry. We've moved item 8 up. This is the recommendation for private moorage in Secret Cove, electorate area B, and refer to staff then to make the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. So this report provides a recommendation to support a re-application to the province to allow 2 existing private docks at a property near Secret Cove. The previous application for 3 docks was reviewed by the SCRD in 2017 and ultimately refused by the province because only 1 dock is permitted per parcel according to the zoning bylaw. So recently, the applicant provided historic evidences indicating that the 2 existing docks had existed before the adoption of the current zoning bylaws. Therefore, a legal non-conforming status can be established for these docks. So upon direction from the province, the applicant seeks reconsideration by SCRD. So staff recommends supporting the applications for existing docks only, subject to conditions related to environmental protection, foreshore access, and best management practice for the docks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, staff. Now, I understand that Mrs. Brunelson is here. Did you wish to say a few words before we proceed, or did you have anything you'd like to say? Thank you very much for that. So to the directors, Director Pratt.
I would like to move these recommendations forward, and thank you to staff and to the Brunelson family, and just would like to move it forward.
Okay. Seconded. Seconded by Director Lee and Director McMahon. Do you have a question?
I just have one minor comment. I know that this has come up at the board before, but last paragraph on page 58 talks about the Sechelt Nation's best management practices for building moorage facilities. And I know that those practices specifically say don't use styrofoam, but I would just like to have that put in our recommendations, specifically because we have such a big styrofoam problem on the coast, just to help with the public information that people are aware that we, do not support the use of styrofoam in docks. So perhaps that would be a suggestion to staff going forward in future, that we could specify that when we're making recommendations.
Rather than amend the motion and do all that, could we have that as a second motion after we up? So all in favor of the motion as presented? Okay. And opposed? None? Sorry, I was going to say Director Knorr, but Mr. Knorr. You have a question? Yeah.
I'd just like to thank on this application, first off, it was when I was away in the hospital that this got screwed up by me being sick. But basically, the staff have helped 100% since then, and I appreciate the board taking that into consideration, and especially Andrew Allen, who was connected us properly with the MOTI and CERB. So I appreciate all the work that's been done by staff and directors.
Thank you, Mr. Knorr. Director McMahon, would you like to make us another recommendation?
Yeah, I'd just like to move that in future when we're making recommendations about building moorage facilities that we include a clause specifically about styrofoam.
The styrofoam not be permitted.
Yes, okay. That styrofoam not be permitted, yeah.
Does somebody wish to second that motion? Okay, seconded? Or did you want to second it? Okay, seconded, okay. Discussion?
Yeah, I think best practice these days is encapsulated styrofoam, which is still styrofoam, but it has a plastic shell around it. So so I'm wondering as to how specific we want to get.
Yeah. Director McMahon, did you have any response to that, or?
Not at this time, because, there are options, though. Encapsulated styrofoam is only one option. There are other options. So.
Staff, did you have any response to that at this time?
Thank you, Chair. Staff would agree that there are options when it comes to the use of styrofoam. Some can lead to greater environmental risks down the line than others, and further that encapsulated styrofoam remains a preferred choice when considering all aspects, including environmental impacts of flotation.
Director Tyus?
Well, I'm wondering if we should just simplify the motion as to say unencapsulated styrofoam, or
Director Lee?
They actually do use styrofoam in its raw form still. What they do, if you've got a fiberglass float, they actually stick a chunk of foam in it so that if the fiberglass fills up, you don't lose it. The styrofoam actually keeps it afloat so that you don't end up in the bottom of the ocean. So I kind of hate to start treading into a technical area. So that's my comments. I agree that using styrofoam blocks that are not encapsulated is a terrible thing. It sticks to my boat when it gives up. But I guess if we said something about unencapsulated blocks used as flotation, I guess we would hit it okay then. But I don't think they're allowed anymore by Forest Land Natural.
Director Hiltz?
I remember last summer listening to an application, the same discussion was going on. And so what for me is missing is what I understood from that discussion last summer was that the Sechelt best practices is the absolute best practice that's on the coast in BC right now. So I'd like to know a little bit more about the difference of what's actually in that before we encumber it. And the only thing that they did in the previous recommendations is to refer to the current Sechelt best practices because it evolves. And so there was was it the first version or the second version or the third version? So there was that's a recollection of a discussion from last summer about this issue. So as a director, I'm not actually sure. I haven't read the best practices, so I don't know what's in there. So I'm not sure how the motion would dovetail with that actual best practices.
Director McMahon?
Yeah, I apologize. We're in the weeds here, and we need to move on. So I'd happily vote against my own motion at this point in order to keep this moving.
All right. It'd be moved and seconded and discussed. All in favor? Opposed? Thank you very much. And I would remind that it was moved initially in the favor of moving this forward in a hurry. So, I'm going to take the liberty of calling a 5-minute break for the board. Yes, sir. The motion did pass. Yes, it did. Yes, it passed. We got a little complicated, but it passed. Yes. Thank you. Okay. And we have a 5-minute break, if you please. Thank you.
survey. But they typically follow land boundaries and road boundaries, but even then, sometimes you have on a football, you have a section on the other side of the mountain, a little chunk there. In our OCP, the agricultural land is also there to serve as a buffer between residential. So even though you can't actually farm, it still serves a role to separate residential and farming activity. So that's also how they draw the boundaries. They include places that you can't farm to keep it separate. So people think, well, our news, you can get tractor and turn it into a field, and that's not what it is. So, and right now there's agricultural land use study going on in the Coast District where they're driving around or with the binoculars and they have an open house. And so the fellow, the biologist who's running the program, now they've actually taken field manuals like iPads and they're using GPS to locate things, they're taking pictures of the ground, everything else. And they're saying that this is the highest quality understanding of agricultural land that's ever happened. And one of them was shocked because they said, we don't actually know what farmers grow. The census that happens every 5 years, the farmers write down what percent blueberries are grown. And so no one really knows what's actually happening. You know how many people live in that city, but we don't know what's being grown. So this is, and so ultimately what they're trying to ask is, how much can we actually grow on the essentially comes from any area, and how much water do we need to do that? And they're looking at 50 years ahead. Yeah, so it's a very cool one. Because this.
Next, Mr. Morrissey is here, and rather to have him wait through other reports, if we could do that, that'd be appreciated. So, everybody agree to that? Okay, thank you. No, I think if we just agree to move it up. Thank you. So, going to item number 7. This is the Sunshine Coast Regional District Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 310-187-2019, related to 2284 Pixton Road for consideration of first reading. Staff, present the report.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a rezoning application seeking permission to build a second dwelling at 2284 Pixton Road. The current zoning for the property is CR2 country residential, which permits only one dwelling. The applicant is proposing to build a 1,400 square feet rancher as a second dwelling, to be located in a vacant area at the southeast corner of the parcel with ample setbacks from the lot lines. The proposal does not appear to have a negative impact on the general perception of building density and rural ambience in these areas. So it can be supported subject to reviewing neighborhood input and meeting technical criteria for water supply and septic systems, which can be considered during the referral period. So staff recommend The bylaw proceed to first reading to be followed by referral and a public information meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sao. I'll go first then to Director Ties.
Yeah, I have no objections at this point of bringing this to first reading. I'd like to add the OCP committee as a referral body, and then move the recommendations as written there.
With the addition.
With the addition of the OCP committee.
As a referral, okay. Do you have a seconder? Seconded. Discussion? Director Hiltz?
Yeah, just a question on staff in terms of the property. It's a well source, so if there's two residents, is it still a private water source? Does it become a, so just like a little clarification on that.
Staff, can you respond to that?
The applicant did not provide information about the wells on the property. So what we know is there is an existing dwelling and an auxiliary dwelling with a studio space. Thank you.
Mr. Morrison, we've been letting everybody else talk this morning, so please come forward.
Good morning. My name is Aaron Morrissey, and for the well, I was talking it over with Andrew Allen, and part of the recommendation would be if I was going to build a new residence, I would be putting a new well for that residence.
Okay.
And he was saying if I went to third reading, then I would have to prove it. Then a well would have to be proven.
Okay, so that information will be coming forth if this proceeds. Good. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, matters on the table. All in favor? Okay. Opposed? Seeing none? Thank you. It's been approved to go to first reading. Thank you.
See you in September. Have a good summer.
Thank you for your patience. Okay, we're back into the agenda now. Back up to item number 5, Annex B, and this is the General Management Planning and Community Development second quarter report. Mr. Hill.
Thank you, Chair. Every quarter, the Planning and Community Development Department reports on activities, and in front of you have a summary of the progress from the respective divisions of the department, and staff would be pleased to answer any questions that the committee might have. Thank you.
Okay, so you're not going to go through all the numbers and all the... Thank you for that. Director McMahon.
Oh, I like to point out typos. I'm pretty sure that on page 26 at the top there, where it says revenue was $38,000 in Q2 of 2019, that's not right. It was $19,000, just for fun, because I was looking at that thinking, my heavens, that's enormous revenues, but no, it's not if you look at the chart. So, or the table. On page 33, we always see reports about Seaview Cemetery, but I never see any reports about Elphinstone Pioneer Cemetery. Why is that?
Staff?
Thank you for the question, Chair. There occasionally are management updates about Elphinstone Cemetery provided as the SCRD Park Service provides management services in that area. Burials are not being actively arranged, or internments are not being actively arranged in that cemetery at the current time. And so with less activity, an activity report has not been provided in the past. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Ties?
Yeah, I just noticed that building permit reviews are trending at about 50% at this point, and maybe staff can comment on that.
Thank you for the question, Chair. The primary factor there is just a change in staffing. So with a change in staff and a learning curve, there was a dip in processing, but staff expect that will even out in the next quarter. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hiltz?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, staff, for the report. It's I'm just always amazed at how big planning and community development is in terms of its scope. And one thing I will look at is on page 34, it was with respect to the Langdale Falls Trail. I was just, if you could give me some background information as to what the erosion, the sort of scale of the erosion, and is it water related, or what was do we know the causes of the scale details?
Staff?
Thank you for the question. So this section of trail was identified as suffering from some erosion concerns as part of a routine trail inspection. And explanatory factors would probably be a combination of water flows through wetter conditions in the winter and human use factors relating to people walking beside the trail. And the section affected, I believe, was about 50 meters and was easily accommodated through a trail reroute that was confirmed with BC rec sites and trails. Thanks.
Thank you. Director Lee?
As on page 33, it says removal of unauthorized informal
Microphone, Director Lee? Yeah.
Talking to myself, doing a good job. Page 33, removal of unauthorized informal structures along trail at Lily Lake Park. What on earth was that?
Staff?
I'm sorry, Chair, staff don't have that information. In general, staff would comment that from time to time, our parks operations team finds small bridges, ramps, and the like constructed often by well-meaning community members, but for a variety of reasons, including mostly safety, but also ecological protection. If those are not constructed to park standards and according to our environmental management standards, they are removed. Thanks.
Okay. Director McMahon?
Sure. On page 35, park signs guidelines is currently being developed. Is there an ETA on that?
Staff?
Thank you for the question. The staff will proceed with these guidelines and expect to have them completed within 2019. The implementation of those guidelines so far has not been determined. There is a small signage budget, and implementation of new signs as old ones are replaced occurs over time. If through the development of guidelines a more significant project is identified as required, then that would be something that staff would bring forward during the budget planning process. Thank you.
Good. Director Seegers?
Thank you. I had that highlighted on mine here as well. And I wanted to just make a comment that District of Sechelt staff are working with the reconciliation project around signage. So it might be wise for our staff here at the Regional District to reach out to that group to find out what they're looking at coming up with around signage, so we have a little bit more consistency potentially up and down the coast.
Staff? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Director Pratt?
I'll just comment that if you read the article in the Local that's written by the chair with communications staff, it's actually talks about some of the signage that the regional district is doing on some of our properties. So there is some that's already working with the Sechelt Nation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Director Ties?
Page 34 says here that we assisted the community with Henderson Beach knotweed and invasive species removal volunteer project, and there are, I know of one very sizable patch of knotweed on Moti land right by Woodley on Lower Road there, and I'm wondering if there's some lessons that could be learned out of the volunteer project that was done there, and then whether it might be transferred or whether we just delegate that responsibility to MOTI, but as far as I know, MOTI tends to use a lot of pesticide, whereas the Henderson project was more of a manual removal and then just snipping the new growth as it came up, and thereby controlling it, which I think is a better way of going about it. So I'm just wondering if there's a way that maybe we could copy that initiative for that area.
Staff wish to comment?
Thank you, Chair. Staff would be pleased to connect an interested community group to discuss the lessons learned from the Henderson Beach project. Every case is unique, but if there's an opportunity to share learnings between groups, the regional district could facilitate that.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments? Director Hiltz?
I'll follow up on the knotwoods. So there's the removal, and what about the disposal side? There's this, where does knotweed get disposed of? So I'm just wondering about the disposal side of that removal.
Director Tighe, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, we recently got a tour from the Gibson's green waste facility, and there the comment was that I guess what used to be Fiedler's, what's the name of it now? Elphinstone Aggregates has a incinerator that can take care of invasives, and that might be a good destination for them. That being said, they do charge for that.
Okay. Any staff, any comments, or just, yeah.
Just a general comment, Chair, that disposal remains a concern for a variety of invasive species, knotweed particularly, and that question is being looked at through next steps on the invasive species work that is being undertaken. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't get the sense we're winning the battle against knotweed. When I drive down the highway, when I look behind the A&W, all the places in town here where knotweed has been treated, it seems to be popping back up. So it's just one of those challenges. Director McMahon?
Yeah, on page 40, our GHG emissions, I was wondering a couple of things. One is how we measure the emissions from the landfill, and also how do these emissions compare to our targets? I believe we do actually have GHG targets, do we not?
Staff?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Staff don't have the specifics for the calculation methodology for the landfill and how other than methane being converted to CO2 equivalent. And I apologize to the committee. Staff don't have information here to be able to comment on how the landfill factors into any community target. Thank you.
Perhaps, I'm sorry, Director McMahon, you want to continue?
I just wanted to follow up with that because at the point where we start diverting organics from our waste stream, presumably our CO2 emissions will drop because that's the primary source of the methane, right? So will we be monitoring that so that we can tell what effect the organics program has on our CO2 emissions?
I wonder if perhaps at some future date staff can bring back a report on that whole issue. And it'd be interesting, I'm sure, to the board to understand how we calculate this whole thing and how our credits are worked out annually. Director Tighe?
Yeah, on that note, I'd also love to see the report that I guess was done a few years ago, again, on methane capture and were sort of the economics at the time that prevented it from going through, and just wondering if we might want to revisit that.
Okay. Is that something staff would just take as direction?
Or do we need a motion?
A motion would be helpful, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I guess a motion to see the feasibility analysis for the methane capture and possible next steps.
And the previous report. That we
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so, seconder for that motion? Seconded. Discussion? Okay, do we clear in the motion? Yeah.
I caught that the feasibility analysis for methane capture report be provided to the board directors to discuss the possible next steps.
Okay. I understand that. That's a previous report that was done. And then Director McMahon's asked for kind of an update on methodology. So, yeah. Okay. Got that?
I think we're looking for clarification on
Yeah.
what should be included in here.
Okay. Go.
I had written a note about report back on the calculation of GHG emissions in relation to the landfill.
Yeah. And on the previous report. Yeah. Okay.
So there was a previous report done around how the calculations are put together, I
No,
believe.
the economics of the methane capture.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Mr. Lamb, I saw you had a question.
Well, it just going back to page 25 in the building.
Okay, well, let's deal with this resolution first, okay?
Yes.
It was seconded, I believe? Okay, so all in favor? Okay, Mr. Lamb now?
Okay. I just wanted clarity on page 25, the building department review. It says it gives you the Q2 total for 13, and then year-to-date total is 57. So I don't understand that, what the difference is.
Mr. Hall, could you clarify?
Absolutely, Chair. Thank you. So this is the case where there was a transition in staff, and so due to a short period of vacancy and a learning curve, those numbers are much less than we might expect in a comparable year, but nonetheless, the building activity on the coast remains strong, and so as staff catch up, I anticipate that the committee will see in the third quarter that the totals are much similar to prior years. Thank you.
Director McMahon?
Yeah, just another quick one. On page 30, there was reference to a barge striking the Keats dock and having to do repairs. Do we have any insurance that covers things like that?
Staff?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, all SCRD assets are insured.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything further on the report? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next item, which I'm sure will also be a quick one. We'll now go to the item 6, Annex C on the agenda, and that's the active transportation infrastructure MOU. And staff, bring that forward, please.
Thank you, Chair Beamish. Since 2017, SCRD and the other Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities regional districts have been working with the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure to define a clear process for local governments to be authorized to construct active transportation infrastructure within provincial road right-of-ways. In the past, and I suppose currently, there are a few pieces of process missing from the toolbox for regional districts to construct active transportation on Modi lands. In the past, a mixed bag of approaches were applied. for example, licenses, permits, and other forms of agreement. And this created at times a moving target, a lack of certainty, and at other times a lack of consistency in terms of responsibilities. This MOU confirms that the license of occupation process is to be used, and this fills one gap, and only one gap, in the process of developing active transportation infrastructure, as it provides a mechanism for coordinating planned work by each party with the other. And a licensing and approval guide, which is under development, will link the license of occupation process and the review of individual projects to provincial design standards and strategies. And as noted in the report, a clear process for achieving tenure, such as a license of occupation, is seen as a prerequisite for the use of gas tax for active transportation infrastructure on provincial lands. And a UBCM review of authority for this use of gas tax is a next step. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I note on this one here, as I'm looking at the agenda page, that again, this voting is only for the rural directors. I as a non-rural director, I have some concern about that because I actually believe we're taking on liability here, and that liability translates to the whole of the Sunshine Coast. So something to think about in that sense, but I'm sure there are other questions that others have. And the question of liability is one that when we did the agenda review, I asked that maybe this document could also be, when we're satisfied with it, go forward to MIA and ask them to comment on it as well as to what we are actually taking on here as a responsibility. So I'm going to go firstly to Director Lee.
I was wondering about that because I understand the main roads that go through the municipalities could actually have bike right-of-way, and you would need the same process in order to do it if you wanted to do that. So I was kind of curious why the municipalities were excluded.
Yeah, we have rights of way along. We have bike paths along the highways that highways and the municipality has negotiated with on 101 as it goes through the town, sort of thing. They exist there. But we also, where we do curb and gutter, we also assume a responsibility for maintenance and other things in those areas. So but we are. I don't know the full answer to that, but I'm willing to look at that. So, yeah. Director McMahon.
As you're probably aware, I have a lot of concerns about this MOU. I will start by saying I'm glad to see the process moving forward because this has been a big hang-up now for a number of years, but I am not happy with this MOU. The first reason is that if you look through the definitions, the MOU does not differentiate between rural roads, undeveloped right-of-ways, and provincial highways. So this MOU would cover Highway 101. And I feel very strongly that local government should not be forced to spend money on infrastructure improvements to a provincial highway to address basic safety hazards that endanger road users, especially vulnerable road users. There is also no priority given to sections of highway that are the only route for all traffic. And I know that that's an issue that's been raised before at UBCM. I am fine with spending gas tax money on trails, on right-of-ways, and I am sort of reluctantly okay with doing it on rural road shoulders because we've ended up doing that as a way, because we need the infrastructure, we've ended up having to do this ourselves. But I find it completely unacceptable for the SCRD to have to spend gas tax funding to repair the dangerous shoulders of a provincial highway. It looks like this is downloading more costs from senior government to local government that has no authority to make key decisions about it. There is no wording in this document that recognizes that MOTI has a mandate and a legal responsibility to service all highway users, not just those in motor vehicles. It reads as if active transportation is a frill that's somehow the responsibility of local governments. The phrase safe and efficient functioning of a provincial public highway seems to exclude active transportation. The document makes no reference to either the BC Active Transportation Strategy or the BC Active Transportation Design Guide, which are key documents and which govern MOTI. I also had a question, and I don't know where buses fit in with this. I've been wondering for some time. I assume that BC Transit and MODI have some sort of agreement that covers bus stops. But we deliver the transit service here on the coast, so I wanted to understand, and we build the bus shelters, so I wanted to understand how that all fits. The active transportation infrastructure guidelines say that priority is to provide seamless connections to transit. So if we're building active transportation infrastructure, we should at least consider where the bus stops are. So I have many concerns about this MOU. I think it needs work. I would definitely not vote in favor of it. I had some questions. I was wondering who represented the SCRD when this was being negotiated, because I don't see our interests represented here. And finally, I want to understand what the process will be going forward.
Okay, to the corporate officer, Angie, or acting CAO, sorry.
Thank you. So this project has been underway for a number of months, and it was led by the former CAO of the regional district. She did a lot of work coordinating with the other CAOs from the other regional districts within the AVICC region. With her departure, it has been a bit more of a fragmented approach, and I attended a meeting or two, and as did GM Hall subsequent to that. When the previous CAO led, it was more spearhead as a project from the Vancouver Island Ministry of Transportation Office in coordination with the CAO from the Regional District of Nanaimo. One other comment I'd like to make is, although the definition, in the document refers to provincial public highway, that's really an MOTI phrase, but it includes arterial highways. So on the Sunshine Coast, Highway 101 is an arterial highway, but the side roads, the connector roads, those are referred to as rural highways. So it is intended to encompass all of those different types of roads and not specifically focus on Highway 101.
Thank you. Director Hills, do I see your hand up?
It has been up, yeah. I guess I'm listening to Director McMahon, and one of the things that Mr. Hall said is this is filling in one of the gaps. So this doesn't solve all the relationship issues. This is kind of moving this relationship along, and we're not where we want to be. Is that kind of what I'm getting, that this is one bit? As it might not be a perfect bit, but it's kind of moving the bits along somewhere? Is this kind of how it's proceeding?
Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, staff would agree with that characterization, and might add that procedurally or from a process point of view, this MOU there's nothing new here that hasn't been done in whole or in part in the past. This just does anchor a process saying this is the tool and this is how the tool is to be applied. Thank you.
I guess if I could speak, one of my concerns, and I raised it during the review of the agenda package, again, it has to do with Section 11 on page 47. And I understand, I guess, that we have been involved in the planning, design, construction, operation, and maintenance and repair of ATIs, but this seems to be going to be much broader, and I assume there's going to be a significant cost, an engineering cost, especially when you start designing for the highway itself, for Highway 101, as opposed to an unopened right-of-way or a pathway. And the design, as everybody knows, the designers also share the liability for what happens on those paths. And also, I think we become it obviously lets the Ministry of Highways off the hook in some ways by not being a focal point of lobbying by other groups the highways can simply say, well, SCRD now has that responsibility, go yell at them. And then we can't write letters to the ministry. So it's certain comfort on that part. But as I say, at this point, my concern primarily is looking after the interests of broadly the regional district, and once we go down this path, the liability, especially on Highway 101, for good design and the first action that occurs with a cyclist or a pedestrian on a walkway that's adjacent to the right-of-way will all be named in that suit. So, Director Tyus?
Yeah, so both track, what's the acronym for active transportation choices, that's the ones, as well as my alternate have commented on this, and I just wanted to read out some of the comments that were given here, and just to not so much as to say let's not vote for this at all, because an imperfect MOU is better than not being able to build bike paths at all, but just so that we might be able to use these comments when we further negotiate and get directions as to how we're going to move forward in this regard. And one was that from a legal perspective, that this MOU is unnecessary. It doesn't give the SCRD anything that isn't already provided for in the status quo, and it doesn't advance the authorization of SCRD-funded active transportation infrastructure in any concrete manner. So, and then from TRAC's perspective, they actually see it as a potential step backwards, and that it entirely omits any reference to MOTI's statutory and policy obligations to build and maintain provincial highways that serve cyclists and other active transportation users. It presents a weirdly inverted picture of jurisdictional responsibility, which places the local government with no particular power, mandate, or funding to build active transportation infrastructure on provincial highways at the center of active transportation work, while leaving MOTI, the actual agency with responsibility and funding to do the work, out of the picture. It's also written as if the entire provincial policy framework governing active transportation doesn't exist. There's no reference to Clean BC, with its targets for increasing carbon-free active transportation modes of transport, no reference to the new active transportation strategy, and no reference to the active transportation design guidelines, all of which are MOTI's responsibility and jurisdiction. Even worse, some clauses, like Clause 16, can be read as creating impediments to building active transportation infrastructure, which is entirely inconsistent with the province's commitments to active transportation. There are some serious flaws with this MOU, and that being said, as Mr. Hall mentioned, it is just a piece in the puzzle. But I think as we move forward, we need to be conscious of this flawed nature of this MOU, and it seems to be a fait accompli anyway. And I don't think we really have. I don't think it'd be in our best interest to shut this down at this point, because it would essentially put us back to square one.
Director McMahon?
Well, I'm just going to reiterate that as long as Highway 101 is part of this MOU, I can't possibly support it. Provincial highways, however, sorry, I got but you know what I mean by provincial highways, should not be part of this MOU. Rural roads, yes. We've already spent gas tax money on Highway 101. I was shocked to find that out, but we spent money paving the side of the road and putting in a fence through Area E. We shouldn't have to do that. That's ridiculous. I'm sorry. The roads are a provincial responsibility, and they're trying to throw it down on us, and we should say no. So I say no.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. Number 11 in here, actually, in my eyes, has us take on liability and accountability and cost for what is not our responsibility. You know, as per Director McMahon and MOTI themselves, they're responsible for the roads. In number 11, it says that we are prepared to be responsible for planning, design, construction, operation, maintenance, and repair. That's a huge liability and cost to take on here as a regional district. Not in favor of that.
Director Lee?
I'm trying to understand. Yes, thanks, Chair. I'm trying to understand all this. If we were to build a path anywhere, we would be responsible for all those things, whether it was on the side of the road or whether it was through a park. So what we're trying to get done is a bike path built alongside a highway that is the only route between communities. If we had a secondary road like a municipality did, we would put it there, but we don't in the rural areas. So I don't understand. If we're going to build active transportation infrastructure, we're going to be responsible if we do it with our gas tax. So I don't know why putting it alongside a highway is any different than putting it through a park. Well, it's obviously a little bit more dangerous, but it's still the only place we can do it. So I kind of lean towards the fact we've got no other choice. Thank you.
Director Hills?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and the idea of retrospective liability is one that I was concerned, but I understand that this is only in the future. So the liabilities that we incur will be on future projects, not on the past. And right now there are SCRD bike paths that we maintain, and there's MOTI bike paths that they maintain, and it's not very clear about where the jurisdictions are and where the boundaries are. So this is about future rather than the past. And so at each application we will have a chance to assess the liability. So that's kind of, I'm kind of on the line of this is the best that can be done at this point to move it forward. So I'm prepared to support it, flawed, because it's about the future. And so all the liability issues will come to the future projects, and that's where we will assess whether this agreement actually is doing what it intends to do. So that's kind of why I would like to move it forward, as flawed as it is. Yes, it's like the parents telling the children that this is the best we're going to give you for now. So that's kind of how I'm seeing it.
Director Seegers?
So we're looking for an agreement with the Ministry of Transport where we can spend gas tax funds that come to the regional district on their responsibility for trails. And we're asking them for a way for us to be able to do that. Why don't we go to the Ministry of Transport and say, you know what, we're not going to be using our funds for doing your job. You need to fund what you've tasked the Ministry of Transport staff with and use the design guidelines as have been put forward with building what we need built. And then the gas tax funds that come here could actually be used on other projects that are actually within our responsibility and our mandate.
Director Tynes?
Well, that certainly goes in line with the UBCM resolution that we've put forward regarding that MOTI actually does take responsibility and of building active transportation infrastructure and not having it done by us. I'm just wondering if it's worth, this is a question to staff, if we vote to not accept this MOU, what happens?
Staff?
Thank you, Chair. Interesting question. Options available to the committee would be to not proceed with this, and for this to be the end of the issue. Another option would be to refer it back to staff for further work with the Ministry of Transportation through whatever process the board might wish to direct. Practically, staff would note that other regional districts around the Strait are considering this MOU this month as well. And so there may be some considerations around coordination and communication with our fellow regional districts in terms of next steps. And at the current time, staff are not aware of what is happening and what questions are being asked in those other regional districts. Thanks.
Director McMahon?
I would definitely like to refer this back to staff. I actually think that many of our concerns could be addressed with some relatively minor amendments. It would be easy enough to put in some language around, the province's active transportation strategies. That's not hard. Removing provincial highways from the definition of the roads that are covered, and whatever the exact wording is for provincial highways, that means provincial highway to them. Recognizing MOTI's mandate to provide public road infrastructure for all road users.
I'll second that. That's a motion.
Sure, that's a motion.
Okay. Motion refer back to staff. Okay. And seconded. So, Director Hiltz?
It was with respect to the liability. I would be interested to know if MIA has reviewed it, and it is a. So I guess you would have to propose a motion that MIA's consideration is in reviewing this agreement. So.
Yeah. We could add that possibly to the motion that be referred to MIA for review, but maybe not in its current state. Maybe but I guess it could be so what their concern might be for liability. One thing in terms of amendments, I would suspect we could add whatever we wanted to in terms of asking, and one might be that where they've got in the definition on page 46 of public highway, they've got including rural highway, arterial highways, and highways referred to. We could simply have excluding arterial highways, sort of thing, and it would be an option to put in there. But knowing that that's the interest, sort of thing. So the motion to refer back to staff for further discussion with MOTI, and then possibly with the other group that is working on this in Vancouver Island, see what kind of results come from there as well. And also an opportunity in the process to refer to MIA to have them comment on the additional liability that is being taken on. Director Pratt?
Thank you. I support it referring it back to staff. I have a lot of concerns as well. And also under bullet number 9, we seem to be missing the District of Sechelt as one of our municipalities.
Oh yeah. I noted that.
Yeah. But overall, I mean, it's I don't want to throw the whole agreement out. Yeah. I understand that our other regional districts in AVICC are looking at this as well. However, our timeline is our timeline. We need to do what's right for us, and if we can, do some tweaks on it and then send it back, I think that would be good. So, thank you.
I guess the other question I have, and just a general question, this is not a new issue for us to be talking about, but this is the first time we've seen or heard about this MOU, that it was obviously being negotiated with, well, we were kind of talking about pathways. Has it come to the board before? Or?
Thank you. So it has been in a number of CAO reports and quarterly reports for the department, reference to the development of it over the last year.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to refer back to staff. Director Lee, you have another comment?
I do agree that we need to refer it back to staff. But I think about my area and the need for a safe way for people to travel other than a car. And if we were to simply wait until it was our turn to get a road rebuilt with a wider shoulder, I'd never see that in my lifetime. And I think that's where most of the regional districts are coming from. So hopefully we can work something out that looks after the liability and still allow us to build a few paths that we deem absolutely critical for our residents. So when we refer it back, I hope we can find a solution. Thank you.
Director Ties?
I just have a question from staff, whether they have enough clarity as to what our concerns are and what, or whether there needs to be more clarification there.
Mr. Hall?
Thank you, Chair. I think staff take away the key points of concern, and staff always feel empowered to bring items back to the committee should further direction be needed. Thank you.
Thank you. So all in favor of the resolution refer back to staff? Opposed? Seeing none, refer back to staff. Thank you.
Thank you. I know most of us have been in receipt of the track revisions. I'm wondering if that should be forwarded on to staff as well, because that reflects some of the concerns that we have and that the active transportation community has on the Sunshine Coast.
I think we have staff has a copy.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, staff are in receipt of that information as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're now on to item number 9, which is the Annex F, page 94, and this is the provincial referral for a log handling, storage, and floating work camp for the Saint-Co Capacity Forest Management Electoral Area A. Staff, Julie Clark, going to present this. Thank you.
Thank you. SCRD received a provincial referral from the BC Ministry of Forest Lands, Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development, seeking comments on an application for a license of occupation for the purposes of a log handling facility, which includes both log storage and a floating work camp. The proposed facility is within the Shishelt-Swia, located in the area of Killam Bay on the east side of Prince of Wales Reach in Jervis Inlet. This is approximately 5 kilometers north of Egmont. The applicant is requesting a license of occupation on the ocean for 2 to 5 years in relation to a heli logging operation on the upland. Staff would like to note that the application does not include a dock or a method to access the mainland from the floating work camp. However, recommendations have been made in this report to account for this potential. Staff would also like to note that the discharge of Blackwater should only be considered if the appropriate permits, treatment, and approvals are in place from the BC Ministry of Environment, and these are not currently included in the recommendations in the report. The province requests SCRD and other referral agencies select one of 4 options to summarize referral comments. Staff recommend option 3, no objection to approval, subject to the comments outlined in this report. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from, well, we'll go to Area B first. Area A first. Director Lee. It's your neighborhood. Yeah.
I was wondering if the province has some sort of a bond to ensure that the cleanup is done and they don't walk away from without doing remediation. Is that part? I'd like to know if that's part of the process.
To staff, is staff aware of that's a requirement?
Thank you, Chair. Staff have quickly conferred. We're not directly aware of such requirement. However, there could be an amended motion to suggest such.
Could be put in there under after I or within I. That a bond, appropriate bond. We wouldn't specify the amount. Would you suggest? Okay, so you would like to suggest that, though?
I'd like to ensure that that does take place, yes.
Okay.
Or, yes.
All right. So put that as within I or complete or as a separate item. It would be J.
I'd be interested to know from staff if this has ever been done before in any of these referrals. I wouldn't like something new sprung on them that hasn't been done for everybody else.
At this point, if we respond to the referral, we could suggest it, recommend that a bond be requested, and otherwise we're going to ask it to come back to us in some sense, but so that we do it that way.
We might as well do it in the referral then.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Okay. We'll add that as item J, that recommended a bond be requested to ensure restoration.
Yes.
Of the tenure area. Okay. Director McMahon.
Yeah, it's just a general question. We get these referrals and we outline these conditions. Does anybody ever follow up afterwards to see if any of these conditions were followed?
Staff?
Thank you for the question. Staff receive notifications afterwards on the status of the referrals, and in addition, staff also occasionally receive questions from the province in advance regarding recommendations if they're considered to be applied.
Thank you. So no further questions. Director Seegers?
Thank you. On page 98, planner had referred to some items that are bulleted there that are not included in the recommendations currently. How could we include those? Should they be as part of, it talks about an environmental in the, let me get back to page 1, or the recommendations. So in 2B, talks about environmental monitoring plan should be implemented during construction and operation. Could these be included as part of the environment? They are environmental concerns, right, that these be addressed. Do we want to include them in their specifics, or will those automatically be included as part of the environmental monitoring of the site?
Staff, comment?
Thank you for the question. Staff would like to note on page 98, the top 2 of 6 bulleted points are the missing 2 recommendations. On page 94, the remaining bullets are included in the recommendations. Staff regret that omission.
So could we add those 2 in?
So the ones that are not included there, the eelgrass, or the,
No, the marine discharge.
Oh, sorry.
Timing window.
Okay, the time window. Sorry, yes, top 2, yeah. Yeah, could they be included in the list of the referral?
Thank you. Staff recommend 2 separate recommendations.
Yeah. Director Hiltz?
Sure, I would move that those 2 be included in the recommendations then.
Okay.
Amend the recommendation?
Well, right now the recommendations are before us, so we'll just add those. Yeah, hasn't been moved yet, so we'll add those items to the recommendation, so thank you. Okay. Director Lee?
On page 99, it talks about referring to advertising the application in the local paper to enable comments from the public, and also referring it to the Natural Resources Advisory Committee and the Pender Harbour APC. I'd really like to see that happen before we go forward. It's we're kind of rushing it without going through the process. Is there some way we can make that happen?
Staff?
Thank you, Chair. So This item has been included on agendas for those groups as soon as possible. Unfortunately, with the timeline provided for referral reply, as is often the case, those meetings are not within the window for reply. And so staff are proposing here to do as we often do, to indicate to the ministry, along with the board's comments, that further comments from advisory committees will follow. And then those are provided immediately following those meetings. Thank you.
So that's item 3 in your recommendations there, page 95, yeah. Okay. Director Lee, is that satisfactory to you that
We're asked to make a decision before we have our expert body provide us with advice, which is a tough way to go. But if staff says this is normal, then it's normal.
Yeah. Director Ties?
Yeah, I'd like to commend staff on this very thorough set of recommendations that they've put together. It looks like there's been quite a bit of work that's gone into this, and I'd like to move all the recommendations as amended within our discussion here. And yeah, so I'd like to move those.
Okay. Do we have a seconder? Seconded. Again, this is rural area directors, so all in favor? Okay, that's approved. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, we're now on to item 10, Annex G, page 122, and this is the waterfront waiver for Carroll Wakeford, electoral area E, and ask staff to present that, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a particular subdivision in Elphinstone that we've been reviewing for some time. It's located on both King and Castle Road and presently accessed from Carbon Road. The subdivision has a number of parcels. A preliminary layout approval has been issued by the Ministry of Transportation, and construction and development of the project is underway. Proposed lots 1 through 7 technically have less than 10% of their perimeter fronting onto a road, and therefore do require frontage waiver approval. As part of preliminary layout approvals, stormwater management plans will be considered, and the APC has reviewed this application in the past. And noting that while less than 10% of the parcel fronts onto the perimeter, each of these parcels has greater than 20 meters width of access, which is certainly significant. It's just due to the particular layout and the road network throughout, and therefore staff feel that access is not a concern and is easily achieved, and do recommend waiver of the frontage requirement. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions on any? Director McMahon?
I have a question relating that to a previous item. If I remember this development correctly, they are not planning to put Castle Road through at this time. And so my question is there a plan to put through pedestrian access along the Castle Road corridor? We have a number of neighborhoods in Elphinstone that have extremely poor connectivity, and we need to be building in these pedestrian paths now.
Staff?
Thank you, Chair. The remainder of Castle Road, as shown on page 126 of the agenda, would also front onto a lower portion of King Road. And there is a remainder of Lot F, which is hooked across Castle Road, which is owned by another party. We have not yet received an application, but would expect at some point a subdivision to unhook that parcel and create lots, which would trigger the development of King Road. A specific pedestrian path was not noted as a requirement within the PLA. Staff can further discussion with the applicant about possibilities. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just ask a question, that is, along the frontage of these properties, there's a covenant. What is that covenant for? I'm looking at the map on page, although they provided their 126.
Excellent question, Chair. I have not reviewed a covenant document yet, but just looking at that, I would suggest servicing, perhaps. Certainly our water mains would be on the public road, but potentially other servicing, hydro.
Could be a pathway.
Could be. We'll investigate further. Thank you.
Okay, does anybody care to make the recommendations? Director McMahon, seconded. Director Tyus. Any further discussion? All in favor? Okay, that's approved. Thank you very much. We're going now to the frontage waiver for Largo Road Community Development, and someone present that, please.
Thank you, Chair. This particular subdivision, Largo Road, was reviewed by committee earlier this year. It has now proceeded towards receipt of preliminary layout approval from the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. Proposed parcels 5 through 7, as identified on page 131 of the agenda, at the east end of the parcel, require frontage waiver consideration. Parcel number 6 is at the end of the cul-de-sac bubble, does have a fair amount of access frontage, although less than 10%, and lots 5 and 7 are panhandle access proposal. This particular subdivision, similar to the previous one, a part of the preliminary layout approval would be to consider stormwater management as well as climate change resilience within road design. And we also recommend proceeding with approval on this one. Thank you.
Thank you. Discussion of this one? Director Tyus?
Yeah, I'd like to just move the recommendations as presented. Thank you.
Okay, seconded? Seconded. Any further discussion? Director Hiltz?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just as from a little bit of information from a planning perspective of advantages and disadvantages over panhandles. Like I thought at one time they weren't encouraged, and now they are. How does this change in the planning realm, I guess?
Staff?
Yes, thank you, Chair. What we attempt to discourage in some other cases are, pardon me, double or triple panhandles which serve as unofficial roads. We do have examples from previous subdivisions prior to taking on the frontage waiver allowance where a triple panhandle asphalted with a stop sign appears to be a road. It is in fact not. In this particular case, if the panhandle provides access to a singular building site, it can be as little as 6 meters pursuant to MODI standards. If there's consideration of future subdivision, that panhandle could be up to 10 meters. So in this particular case, singular panhandle to us was acceptable, and we noted that a redesign to create larger frontage may have pushed Largo Road further to the west, which would have enabled us to take a smaller park dedication, and we are pleased with the amount of park we were able to accept, which didn't, of course, impact additional components of the layout. Thank you.
Could I just ask a question if I could? What is the land beyond? I don't see it clearly indicated here, say, adjacent to lots 7, 6, and 5. What is there? Is that undeveloped land, or is there?
No, it's Dave's house.
Mm-hmm. It is another residential parcel.
Okay.
A larger size than proposed here. Acreage, I will estimate, but it is a privately owned parcel. Yes.
And no opportunity for future development, or does it have separate access from another location?
It does have access from the lower road.
Yeah.
There has been a subdivision in that area within the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, creative subdividing does create different models and different formulations, doesn't it? Lots 7, 6, and 5 are interesting. Okay, has it been moved and seconded? No, it hasn't been moved. Or it has been? It's been moved and seconded. Okay, so all in favor? Okay, it's passed. Thank you. That's approved. Okay, now we're moving on to the item 12, Annex I. This is the Gibson and District Fire Commission. This is coming back to us as amended terms of reference. And for presentation, who will present? Yep. Our CAO.
Thank you. So the board requested some changes to the terms of reference and asked that they be referred to the individual commission members. They were sent out to the commission for comment. No comments were received, and so they're back before the committee as requested. And subject to review and endorsement, they'll be sent to the town of Gibsons for formal comment.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? I did have a conversation with this with Councillor Kroll, who is on the commission and represented. He was happy with the changes and happy with the document. So, Director Ties?
I'll move the recommendations as presented.
Seconded by Director McMahon. Any further discussion? I get to vote on this finally today. Thank you. Yeah. All in favor? Hey. Okay. Okay. We'll now move on to the committee minutes, and there are some resolutions that need to be addressed. Sorry, Director McMahon.
I just have a procedural question, because EF and Gibson's vote, can D move the motion, or does it have to be a voting member to move the motion?
Yeah, probably a good point. So that yeah.
I didn't know I wasn't allowed to vote.
Yeah. Yeah.
I always vote on everything.
Sales. Oh no, it's a good point. It's yeah. But I think that yeah. Yeah, CEO.
Thank you. In accordance with the procedure bylaw, only members participating in the service at committee can move, second, or vote on the recommendation.
Okay, let's do that again then. So that somebody like to move that. Director Hills, seconded by Director McMahon. All in favor, and is approved again. Thank you. But thanks for trying.
It's like move it forward.
We'll help you out sometime. Yeah. Okay. Okay, there are some resolutions within the context of the agenda, or the minutes coming up. So we take them one at a time. On Annex J, which is the Agriculture Advisory Committee minutes of June 11, which has been received. So on page 139, there's a resolution, recommendation number 2, that Agriculture Advisory Committee requests the Ministry of Agriculture and Agricultural Land Commission consider moratorium on all non-soil bound licensed dark site cannabis production in the LR until such time as local governments can create or amend local bylaws or regulations. So that's a recommendation within the body of this that be forwarded. So any comment or discussion on that? Somebody care to move that? Director Pratt?
Just a quick comment on this first, and then I will move it. Well, actually, I'll move it now and then speak to it after it's on the floor.
Director Pratt, seconded. Seconded Director McMahon. Okay, discussion. Director Pratt?
Yeah, I fully support this because it's a little alarming that you can build a full cannabis facility using cement pads and everything on ALR land, and the ALC can't do anything about it. So I think municipalities and local government need a chance to respond to this first.
Yeah. Okay. Director Hills?
So I guess it is a question to staff. Is this in the work plan to deal with this issue in terms of a zoning process, in terms of to control the dark sites?
Staff?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's something we have certainly considered and have worked into the draft of the new zoning bylaw, which committee will see in the near future. However, we have not move or received direction specifically to amend the two zoning bylaws as they exist at present. Even the review of zoning bylaw 310, of course, does not impact zoning bylaw 337. So there are two pieces here, the immediate action and a long midterm action.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. My understanding is that in this case it's talking about licensed cannabis production. All licenses have to come to the regional district for referral, and if it's denied at the regional district, then it will not be approved by the province. That's the understanding that I've gotten in District of Sechelt for referrals.
Okay. Director Ties?
Yeah, I would, tagging on to Director Hiltz's comment there, I'd like to make a separate motion, but I think we should vote on the motion on the floor first. So.
Okay, this has been moved and seconded. All in favor? And this is all here on this particular one. So all in favor. Let me see again. In favor. Opposed. One opposed. Okay. Thank you. And Director Hiltz.
Just kind of a process in terms of how we approve it here and how staff interact with this recommendation and the AAC, and just how is this typically how things flow through?
Staff?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Yes, in general, this is the typical flow where an AAC recommendation would come to this committee for the committee's consideration. In keeping with the advisory nature of the committee, staff would observe that the wording of the motion in this case is a little bit odd, but that the intent here is to express support for the position which has been articulated by UBCM, and so staff would take in terms of the next steps, staff, if directed by the board, would take into consideration the intent of the motion and indicate that it has board support. Thank you.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. While I agree that we do not want large non-soil based cannabis production in the ALR, in the regional district, the Ministry of Agriculture and Agricultural Land Commission is actually not responsible for licensing of these sites. So they have changed their policy in that they are no longer commenting on them. But I can't support this the way it is because it has no actual action to impact our concern. So that's why I voted against it.
Thank you. I still have the question about water usage and water consumption by cannabis operations. Are they agricultural? If they're not agricultural, do they have to shut their water off and stop watering like everybody else does at level 4? So they're level 3. So it's one of those. And then do the plants die, or do they have other sources of water? I suppose. But
they're indoor, so they're exempt.
They're exempt for their indoor. That's right. So they can continue watering like house plants. So. Yeah. Okay, so that's Director Taj, you have something?
So considering the presentation we had and the economic impact that our cannabis community here has on the coast, they estimated it at $200 to $250 million a year, and so it's a very large driver of the local economy here. I think that we, as a local government, should start getting, I think right now we're a little bit behind the ball as to how things should be developing and how things should evolve in licensing and legalizing smaller scale as well as large scale productions here on the coast. So I would like to make a motion that staff start liaising with other regional districts like the Squamish-Lillooet Regional District that have made some headway in this regard, and so that we may be able to get all those illegal grow-ops that are currently here on the legal path in a sort of a timely manner, and that we don't fall behind the 8 ball and then suddenly we're the only ones left that don't have any kind of marijuana guidelines, and that large economic driver will depart from here. So yeah.
Do you recommend
staff liaise with other regional districts that have made some headway and give some recommendations to the board as to how we may proceed in developing a legal marijuana industry here.
Seconded? Seconded? Are you seconding, Director Hiltz?
I would like to just add
You have a question first?
to Director Ties, in terms of your motion, in terms of directing staff, is this also to how to manage the dark sites as well, opposed to the micro? Is this, and to provide some recommendations on managing the dark sites, the concrete-based dark sites? I like dark sites.
So this clarification, so are you seconding that motion?
Well, we're modifying that Director Ties' motion, and I'd be happy to second it whenever he's happy with his motion.
I believe that dark sites would be encompassed in the legal marijuana, just with what I said beforehand, that they would be included in that. But yes, if you want to specifically pull those out. Then
we're looking at possible potential rezoning issues with regards to the dark side, opposed to just the legal operations of the illegal operations.
Mm-hmm.
Are you comfortable you have the resolution captured? No. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, this is what I've captured. That staff liaise with other regional districts, such as the SLRD, on developing guidelines for developing a legal marijuana industry on the Sunshine Coast. Okay. And to include the management of concrete-based dark sites.
Okay. You comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds good.
You comfortable with that? Would you care to second it? I'll second it. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, it's passed. Thank you. The next item is ALC meeting June 25th, and there's a recommendation on page 141. Two recommendations, actually, recommendations 2 and 3. Recommendation 2, the Agricultural Advisory Committee recommend the Ministry of Agriculture and ALC recognize and include landowners as defined persons under all ALC and ALR regulations, and that landowners of ALR land be provided the ability to apply for an appeal process for rejected applications from the ALC. And the second recommendation that Agricultural Advisory Committee recommends that in order to promote the economic viability of farm operation, a maximum of 2 dwellings should be permitted on a parcel not to exceed the current 500 square meters floor area limit. Somebody care to move those 2 recommendations? Director Hiltz?
Having sat in the discussions of this, there was not necessarily a lot of clarity about the implications to the regional district, so my preference would be to refer it to staff to kind of understand how.
Okay.
That would be my recommendations, is to have it to go to staff first. So
your recommendation is refer recommendations 2 and 3 to staff for
yes.
comment?
Yes.
Okay. And that was seconded. Further discussion? Yeah. All in favor? Thank you. That's approved. The Natural Resource Advisory Committee minutes of June 27th. Anything arising on those? There are recommendations in those documents as well. Recommendations 2, 3, and 4 on page 143. Somebody care to move those recommendations? Director Hiltz?
Director Ties and I were both there. Director Ties is liaison, so I should let him go first, I think.
Director Ties?
Yeah, I'll move those recommendations as presented.
Okay. And seconded? Seconded. All in favor? Okay. Opposed? Seeing none. Approved. The Egmont Pender Harbor Advisory Planning Commission. No recommendations. So you want to mention that at all? You have any comments on it, Director Lee? No? Seeing none. Half Moon Bay, it's gone. Past you. Half Moon Bay Advisory Planning Committee, any comments? There's a recommendation there that the Half Moon Bay Advisory Planning Commission recommends the SCRD place a fence, hedging rocks, or an appropriate demarcation and signage along the property lines. This is for the access to Truman Road beach access. Somebody wish to Director Pratt?
I'm going to put the question to staff as if there's anything already planned for that prior to, or what the cost would be on this, or because unfortunately I wasn't at the meeting, so I wasn't part of the discussion. So I'm just wondering what's already planned for the Truman Beach access, and if there is anything, and if staff has a comment on this recommendation first.
Staff?
Thank you, Chair. So this item was put before the APC as part of an earlier board decision to cancel SCRD's license of occupation for a beach access in this area, and considerations that staff brought forward with input from the community at that time included that the beach access does not actually provide access to the beach, as it ends in a approximately 20 foot rock drop, and at the road end at Truman Road, it is effectively not public access because of development encroaching into the right-of-way. And so although there is a very narrow, I think it's a 3-meter road right-of-way, it was not functioning as a public beach access and was not being used by the community. And so there was a desire on the part of the neighbors and the broader community in the Truman Road area to stop expending public resources on that area and instead investigate sensitive improvements to the Crab Road end access, which is in regular practice of being used by the community. And so with regards to the specific recommendation from the APC, staff's comments would be that the area is not under SCRD jurisdiction. It's a Modi road right-of-way. Any work conducted within that road would require a permit or an authorization to do works or a license. SCRD would be responsible for maintaining them, and that the beneficiaries of that work would seem to be the immediate neighbors and not the community. And so staff would struggle to support such a recommendation. Thank you.
So a suggestion might be to provide that information back to the Advisory Planning Committee and in response?
Certainly staff could do that, yes.
And perhaps also that would be a Modi right away then, I'm assuming. Perhaps to Modi to suggest that they might want to put a hedge around it.
Staff certainly could make that suggestion. I might have added to my earlier comments, it's a very steep, rocky slope, and so the success of a hedge or a fence on that location would
be very questionable. Yeah. Director Hiltz?
So I remember this is a public right-of-way. It's a Modi, so there isn't really a way that the regional district can restrict the public from using that parcel of land. So
under the MOU, though, we could put gas tax. We'll move on. Recommendation number 2, I think, again, that could just be referred to staff as well, that's asking the disaster coordinator to provide insight on evacuation sometime.
Just to go back to the first recommendation and then tie into the second recommendation, do you need a motion for us to refer it back to you to deal with the APC, or? Nope. Okay. No. And then the second recommendation, I'm happy with just leaving it with staff on that recommendation as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Annex O, we have the Elphinstone Advisory Planning Commission, and there are 2 very large recommendations in there, or at least 2 recommendations. Director McMahon, what would you like to do with those? I guess they are internal recommendations.
Well, the first one is the regular, comments on the referrals. The one that I wanted to speak to is recommendation 3.
Okay.
That the SCRD put an attendance clause in the APC bylaw, because that's come up. We had a member of the commission who didn't attend for 2 years. So there should be something in that bylaw about expectations on attendance and what happens if somebody repeatedly doesn't show up. And I would suggest that, staff could look at that before the next round of APC intakes. Yeah, intake. Staff have any comments on that?
Joe, do you have any comments on that?
Just board direction would be required to amend the bylaw, and an indication of what might, if there is a particular time period of absences that is considered, that would be helpful. Otherwise, we'll make some proposals.
Do you have a suggestion, Director McMahon?
Actually, under the Library Act, if you miss 3 consecutive meetings, unexcused, although I'm not sure how we would define excused in this situation, but that some action be taken. But I think 3 consecutive meetings, given the number of meetings that the APCs typically hold in a year, that's pretty significant absence. And I would take staff's advice on how to word that.
Okay, so would you like to move that then?
Yes, sorry, we're not really defining our motions very well today. I apologize.
Okay. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Thank you. That's approved. So thank you. And finally, the West Howe Sound Advisory Planning Commission of June 25, 2019. And any recommendations in there, Director Hiltz, you'd like to bring forward?
No, just to adopt as a whole.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, that finishes those documents. We'll now move to communications, and this is the request by Don Cunliffe that the Half Moon Bay Community Association looking forward to submitting a letter of intent to apply for legacy funds from the Sunshine Coast Community Forest. These funds will be used for the support construction and replacement of Hall at Cooper's Green as per our agreement with the SCRD. And they're looking forward to SCRD's letter of support and assisting with the application process for funds from the Sunshine Coast Community Forest. Director Pratt?
I'd like to move that the board provide a letter of support for the Half Moon Bay Community Association letter of intent, to apply for the legacy funds, and that it be forwarded to the board meeting this afternoon.
Okay, that's been moved, seconded. Any discussion? All in favor? Okay, that's approved. Thank you. And new business, Director McMahon.
Yes, it was brought to my attention that in 2015, the SCRD received a community amenity contribution for community agricultural benefit of $75,000 from the development of DL 1312. No funds have been used so far, so I would like to move that we direct staff to research options to use the money, perhaps to help farmers with water, and to seek advice from the Agriculture Advisory Committee before coming back to the board.
Okay, seconded. And you able to capture the recommendation? Okay. So everybody understand the recommendation? I guess, is that just a, let me just hang on a second. Is that something that's just for area for rural?
Just for Area D, actually.
Yeah. So the agricultural gain, so sorry, Director?
I'd say if it's agricultural
Yep.
and it's regional, it's all of us.
Okay, all right, so we'll go with that. So it's been moved and seconded, all in favor? Thank you. Everyone wants to get to lunch, I can see that, okay. There is no in camera? Oh, so Director McMahon?
I just have a follow-up question, and that is, are there any other little pots of money like that sitting around that we don't know about? That
Is it still sitting around?
Well, yes, staff said it is.
Okay,
oh,
good.
well,
Okay.
I assume it is, but yeah.
Yeah. anyone able to comment, or should we refer that to Tina?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head, but there are some amenity funds that come in from some independent power projects, and many of those funds are spoken for or allocated to different projects. But off the top of my head, I can't speak to.
Thank you. Director Pratt.
Just a quick question. Is this Mr. Allen's last planning meeting?
Well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, at least with us. Anyway, sorry, I should have. Just before we go to adjournment, I just want to just say thank you so much, Andrew, for all of your work for the regional district over the last number of years. And as I said to you earlier, I'm excited for you. I'm disappointed for us. We'll talk about Sechelt later. But congratulations on your upcoming role, and just thank you so much for everything you've done for us, and very happy that you're staying on the coast. Yeah, that's incredible, and best of wishes on your new role.
Okay, seeing nothing further, motion to adjourn. Moved, seconded, all in favor? Okay, inquiries. Media inquiries? No inquiries. Excellent. We are adjourned. Thank you very much.